I'm afraid we haven't got a video for the next series, so but you'll have to put up with me. Well, I got asked a question by Bruce today. What's happened to your Beamer? Well, I'll show you what's happened to it. Do you know what? Good riddance to it, you know. I'll be honest, I kicked it before it went as well. But we took it to Lyons Garage. Best garage in town, but other garages are available, but best garage in town. We took it to Lyons, and Richard rang me up and he said, Simon, it's not worth it, it's not worth it. And so he arranged for us to scrap it. And I must say, you know, I'm not sorry to lose that thing, because I was always anxious it would break down. But I'll tell you how that started. When we first bought it, we bought it from a garage I wouldn't recommend. Come to me afterwards and I'll tell you. I don't want them to sue me if I do it on here, but I really wouldn't recommend them, but out sort of Gunthorpe way. You can work it out from there, but I really wasn't happy. And I'd driven Hazel to Peterborough, and she was going to look after one of our grandchildren there. And I was on the way back, almost back, and it was quite a busy road that came like from Arnold into Nottingham. And I was just, in fact, I was turning and thinking, I think I'll go to church and have a cup of coffee, a nice church cup of coffee. And just as I turned onto this main road, do you know, it's like all the lights start flashing and it goes beep, beep, beep. And then it just stopped, like in the middle of all this sort of traffic rearing past and tooting you. And I tried to start it again and nothing happened, and it was completely dead. And actually, it was such a busy road to be on, and it took about an hour and a half for them to come and get me. Someone came from the city centre, and I thought he was like really busy, and I said, you must have been busy. And he said, no, not really, I was changing a puncture. And I thought, you mean you left me there? But I have to say, I found it like quite a scary experience, because just suddenly you're on this busy road and everything sort of cuts out. And the garage took it back, kind of quite reluctantly, but they took it back. Actually, if you get in that position before and you've just bought a car, you know, legally you can reject it. I'm a bit of an expert on all this now, but I didn't reject it. They took it back, and they got a reconditioned engine put in. And from then on, driving that car, I was stuck in what I call a doom loop. You know what I mean? You know, you constantly replay what went wrong before and think it's bound to happen again. So every time we set off on a long journey, I'd have my contingency plan for the breakdown. You know, so if it was winter, I'd make sure there was blankets. I put blankets in the car and make sure there was a flask in the car. I'd make sure I'd got my high-vis vest, and I was just always ready. And as soon as something started to go wrong, and things did kind of go wrong with it, as soon as something started to go wrong, or a light flashed, or it smelt. Actually, can you see how hazy it is there? It wasn't foggy, that smoke from the car when he started it. I think, oh no, it's going to break down, it's going to break down. And it was that doom loop I got in. Actually, it never actually broke down again. Things did go wrong with it, but it never actually broke down. But every time I got in it, I was in the doom loop. I was thinking, it's going to break down, it's going to break down. I hope it doesn't break down on one of those scary stupid motorways that they call smart motorways, you know. And, you know, I was thinking, what do I do if I break down? And I'm in this doom loop all the time. And, you know, to be honest, I think I've had a bit of a doom loop mentality a lot of my life. I know, they talk about excuses. I know I blame my grandmother, but I've got to get out of it. Because my grandmother, she was always doom and gloom. And we got married in 1982. I know we looked too young. Falklands War was on, talking about the wedding, and she said, let's hope you don't get called up, dear. Let's hope the Argentinians don't drop a nuclear bomb on us. You know, she was like, my mum used to call her Job's comforter. Job was someone in the Bible who had these people who didn't give him much comfort. But she was like, doom and gloom. But I've kind of let that thinking seep into my mind. And I've always thinking, what's going to go wrong? What can go wrong And then I start worrying about it and almost like expecting. I mean, we're going on holiday in a week's time. We're going to Lanzarote, and we're really looking forward to it. But already I'm thinking, what if the taxi doesn't come? What if I lose my passport? What if I get ill before? And then I start worrying about that. It's a doom loop. It's a doom loop. And I wonder if you've got that kind of mentality as well. Maybe you've had a setback or something fell apart, and you're living with that expectation of things going wrong again. So instead of stepping out, you shrink back and you hide behind that excuse, everything goes wrong. And in a funny sort of way, you feel sort of secure. Sometimes I feel secure in my doom loop because I know what to expect and I won't be surprised if it happens. The truth is, we can let this kind of doom loop dominate our lives. We can let past difficulties and failures define our present. And here's the challenge. If you stay in the doom loop, you're letting the past control your present. You're just kind of sticking yourself in a rut that you don't need to be in. You end up in survival mode. You get up and do what you can to survive, waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And that's not how you're meant to live. So this is what I want to help you to do today. I want to help you to stop surviving and start striving. Now, as you know, this is the final part of our series, Paper Walls. And we've been talking about excuses that keep us from living our lives fully. And to be honest, those excuses can look really real sometimes. They can look like big reasons. We call them reasons. I can't do this because I can't take my car to the Lake District because it'll probably break down. Or whatever your reason might be. There might be reasons, but actually they're excuses. They're like walls from a distance. They look impenetrable and solid. But when you get nearer, you'll see that your paper walls. I hope you like the early introduction to it. Because actually Andrew made me this paper wall, and then the first thing I did was stick a chair through it when it was in my office. But anyway, that illustrates the point. Paper walls, you can just break through. And you've probably said, well, that's just the way I am, or I can't change that. And things always go wrong for me. They only always go wrong because you kind of expect them. It's like traffic lights, isn't it? You pick people, when it's red, they'll say, I always get a red light. I'd like to actually statistically prove it, because you probably don't. You probably just get the same amount of red lights that everyone else does, but you notice them more. You probably have as much go wrong in your life as other people do, but you just emphasize that more. That's my experience anyway. But we need to break through those paper walls. And that can change everything. How you live, how you see yourself. And in this instance, this paper wall of saying, well, everything's going to go wrong, so I might as well not bother. I might as well just stick where I am and survive, and I know I'm safe here. It's about stepping out of that doom loop. It's about tearing through that lie that says, well, it'll all go pear-shaped. It's bound to. It's about breaking out of that survival mentality. Because God has so much in store for you. Now, you might be thinking, I'm not a Jesus follower, so this doesn't really apply to me. And I get that. And if that's you, I hear you. And that's okay. We're really pleased that you're here and you're not a Jesus follower, and want you to feel welcome and understand what's happening here. But can we agree on one thing, right? Fear, doubt, past hurt, those things are real, aren't they? So if you're unsure about God right now, just imagine what breaking through that wall of fear or disappointment or pessimism might mean for your life. Imagine how much lighter and freer you'll feel on the other side of that paper wall. It's worth considering. And for those of you who do follow Jesus, listen up. Because whatever mistakes you've made, whatever failures there are in your life, whatever hurts, and we've all got them, they don't get to dictate your future. That's not God's best for you. That's not what he wants for your life. And Jesus is right there, ready to help you tear those walls down. And he's sent the Holy Spirit who will give us the power to break through them. But first, you've got to recognize they're not as solid as they seem. They're just paper. So I want to ask you this. Are you ready to break out of the doom loop? Are you ready to stop surviving and start thriving? Well, let me introduce you to someone who did this a long time ago. And what's fascinating and encouraging is that it wasn't an instant transformation. It didn't happen immediately. But God persisted, and he didn't give up on him. And his name is Moses. Now, you might have heard of Moses or you might not have, but he's the guy who led an entire nation, the Hebrew people, out of slavery. For years, they'd been enslaved by the Egyptians, building pyramids and whatever else the Egyptians wanted them to build. And we remember Moses as one of the most iconic leaders in history. I mean, Moses seen as such a great leader. But here's what you might not know. Moses never really felt he was up for the adventure. In fact, when we first meet him, he's in survival mode. This is a picture that was taken that's just kind of emerged of Moses, and he wouldn't have been a very happy bunny. Now, just to give you a bit of a backstory, Moses has got a really incredible story. Because when the Egyptians started to oppress the Hebrew people and make them slaves, the king, Pharaoh, was really worried about they were going to outnumber them, and he was a wicked man, and he wanted to have all the boys killed. But Moses was hidden in the bulrushes, in a wicker basket, and the king's daughter found him and adopted him. And so here we have this young Hebrew who was brought up in the palace. He had luxury all around him. He would have had the best education. But of course, deep down, he knew he didn't belong. He was a Hebrew. And the rest of his people were living as slaves. And we see from what happens later, he really felt that deeply. And he must have had that kind of imposter syndrome. Why is it me who's in this luxury when the rest of my people are in such misery? And one fateful day, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and he flipped. In a flash of anger, he killed that Egyptian. Now, don't go out and do that at home, will you? I don't recommend that, but that's him. He's an ordinary guy, and he got angry, and he killed someone at that point. And just like that, he panicked, ran away, and ended up in the desert tending sheep. From the luxury of the palace to the barrenness of the desert. From being waited on by servants to being bleated at by sheep. And sheep are, they're kind of noisy, silly, smelly things. I know that our dear late friend Ian McVicker used to say, you don't understand sheep, but, have you ever driven in the Peak District through Chatsworth when the sheep are there and they just walk in front of your car and they're smelly? And do you imagine spending all your life with sheep and listening to meh? Oh, I wouldn't fancy that at all. That's a drastic fall. And I kind of empathise with Moses a bit, because I remember I was kind of between churches and it was a difficult time, and I did a bit of work in a school, which I quite enjoyed. I did a bit of work helping children with learning difficulties. But if you were a helper, those lovely teachers, well, it was Rachel there, lovely teachers, those lovely teachers used to sit in the staff room drinking hot chocolate and tea and coffee, and they used to send the likes of me into the freezing cold playground. And that particular playground was freezing, it was really exposed, and I remember sitting there watching the children, not knowing what to do if they did sort of play up or have a fight, because I was too soft, and thinking, they didn't even give me a cup of tea. So standing there in the freezing cold thinking, is this what's become of me? I felt like Moses. I wasn't surrounded by sheep, I was surrounded by children. Moses was in survival mode for years. And okay, he'd met a lady and he got married and he had a family, but that wasn't what he was brought up for, surely. To look after sheep. Is that what I'm going to spend the rest of my days doing? I'm sure he would have asked himself that. Imagine, you go from living in one of the most powerful households in the world to being a desert fugitive. I mean, the Egyptians could have caught up with him at any time. They could have tracked him on his phone or something like that. I'm sure he would have felt like a failure. I'm sure he would have felt like his circumstances defined him, like his mistakes disqualified him, that he'd blown it completely. And for years, Moses just existed, hiding from everything that could have been. All that potential, all those dreams, they're gone. But here's the good news. God wasn't done with Moses. And one day, while Moses was out in the desert, he saw something wild. He saw a bush that was on fire, but wasn't being consumed, wasn't burning up. Imagine that. You think, oh, that looks odd. He saw, maybe it's one of those fake fires or something. That no, they weren't invented in those days. So he went closer and he saw it was burning, but actually the bushy stuff was still there. It wasn't being consumed. It was something miraculous. And what's going on here? And then at that point, God spoke to him. God said, I am the God of your ancestors. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now remember, Moses was a Hebrew, but he'd been away from his people all his life. I mean, he was a baby when he was in the bulrushes, and Egyptian probably would have been his first language. And I've no idea what language he would have been speaking in the desert, because his father-in-law would have probably had his own tribal language. And here comes God speaking to him in his own language, saying, hey, you remember your ancestors? I'm the God they worship. Do you know about Abraham? Now, it's interesting. I wonder if he did know about Abraham at the time. He must have learned, because he doesn't argue about that. Abraham was the first of the Hebrews, the person that God said, I'm going to make you a great nation. He was their forefather. Remember Isaac? Isaac was Abraham's son. Jacob was his son. He doesn't go through any more of the family, because that would take ages and ages. But what he's saying is, hey, I'm the God your people worship. And I'm the God who says there's something special about your people because they belong to me. That's what he's saying effectively. So here's Moses. He's listening to this from God. He's seeing the bush on fire. He's realizing, wow, this is God. How does he react? Moses covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. I mean, that's natural. When you look actually right through the older part of the Bible, the Old Testament, you'll see, when people saw God, suddenly they would realize God was amazing and God was different to them. And they had, what we call sin. They had sin. They were the other side of God, and they had to cover themselves up because it was just too much to look at. And also, I wonder also if he covered up his face because he realized he'd blown it. God, you're coming to me. Do you know who I am? Yeah, I'm the guy who flipped. I'm the guy who didn't do any good at all. I cared about my people, and what did I do? I killed a Hebrew, and I'm a fugitive now. But God had something important to tell him. The Lord said, I have seen the trouble my people have suffered in Egypt, and I've heard their cries when the Egyptian slave masters hurt them. I'm concerned about their pain. I have come down to save them from the Egyptians. I will bring them out of the land. I will lead them to a land with lots of room. And Moses must have thought, oh, wow, that's great. And maybe I can escape this miserable existence and be with them. But there was something else coming as well. So now I am sending you to the king of Egypt. Bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Wow, yeah, not exactly a simple task, is it? Especially as he was a fugitive on the run. Well, Moses, what did he do? Did he say, oh, great, I'm up for it, God? Well, he freaked out. He threw out excuse after excuse, and they were his paper walls. Here's the first one. God, I'm not a great man. Why should I be the one to go to Pharaoh? You can almost kind of see his brain ticking away. You got the wrong guy here. Surely you've got the wrong guy. I'm not the one. You've been asked to do something and you're not the qualified person for it, and you think, no, actually, it's not me. It's someone else you should be asking. God, I'm a shepherd in the wilderness. I'm a fugitive. Actually, there's probably someone else more suitable. Did God think that? God said, I will be with you. This all-powerful God who'd shown himself in this miracle, who'd expressed his compassion for his people, was telling this fugitive shepherd he was going to be with him. That's all he needed to know. It wasn't about Moses' ability. It was about God's enabling. But that's not enough for Moses. There's another paper wall. Moses said to God, when I go to the Israelites, I will say to them, the God of your ancestors sent me to you. What if people say, what is his name? What should I tell them? And actually on the surface you can understand that, because they'd been in slavery all those years and their faith must have waned. When you're down and you're thinking, where is God in all this? And I might come to them and they might say, well, God? What has God ever done for us? And God doesn't give a great explanation, but he says something amazingly, incredibly, wonderfully powerful. God says, I am who I am. When you go to the people of Israel, tell them, I am sent you. What he's saying is, I'm eternal. I am God. I am the creator. I am all that you need. You don't need to explain everything about me, because I am God. Leave the rest with me. That was awesome. That was a revelation of God to Moses, this sad man standing in the desert surrounded by a load of smelly sheep. But that's not enough for him. Another paper wall. Then Moses answered, what if the people do not believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord did not appear to you? It's understandable. I mean, they must have got frustrated. They must have got disheartened. They must have got disillusioned, and maybe many of them had lost their faith. And God doesn't answer him. He shows him signs, miracles to prove his power. Moses' staff turns into a snake. And then his hand becomes leprous, which must have been quite scary. I'll show you what I can do. His hand's leprous. What? And then it heals. And don't read too much into the significance of those things. What God is just saying is, I can do miracles. I am God. They're meant to show the enslaved Hebrews that God was real, ready to act, and going to work through Moses. I'm going to use you miraculously, Moses. And if you know the story, you'll know that one of the greatest miracles that God did through Moses was to lead them to the sea, and the waters parted and the land was dry. Wow. I'm going to do miracles. Imagine God said that to you. What did Moses say? And I'm so glad Moses is like me. He had another excuse. Moses said to the Lord, but Lord, I'm not a skilled speaker. Actually, I don't think that's true, because he's been arguing with God. And if you can argue with God, you must be a pretty skilled speaker. I've never been able to speak well. That wouldn't have been true, because he was brought up in Egypt. And now, even after talking to you, I'm not a good speaker. I speak slowly. And I can find the best words, can't find the best words. And God's response, then the Lord said, who made man's mouth? Who made him deaf or able, or deaf or not, or able to speak? Who gives man sight or makes him blind? It is I, the Lord. Now go. I will help you speak. I will tell you what to say. God knew Moses' insecurities, but reassured him. I've got this. But even so, he wasn't ready to go. Moses says, please, Lord, send someone else. After all those reassurances and revelations, Moses still doesn't want to do it. And we're told the Lord became angry with Moses. Now, this anger is not the kind of anger that lashes out. He's not going to suddenly send a bolt of lightning and zap him. It's the kind of anger that says, enough. Come on, Moses, come on. We've had enough of this. I'm drawing a line. With your children, when suddenly you say, enough. My dad used to have this phrase, you have been warned. And that was it, we pushed it too far. And that was what God was saying. There's a line there, and you're about to cross it. You're not going to. And he doesn't give up. He actually gives him some help. He tells him that his brother Aaron from the family of Levi is a skilled speaker. He's already coming to meet you, and he will be happy when he sees you. I will tell Aaron what to say. Then you will tell Aaron. Both of you will know what to say and do. And Aaron will speak to the people for you, and you will tell him what God says, and he will speak for you. Nevertheless, this is your task, Moses. And that's great, actually. God understands those things, and he gives him a team. And finally, Moses accepts. And he goes back to Egypt. Not as a prince, but as a man who God chose and wouldn't give up on. Moses' paper walls were turned down, not because of potential that he had, but because of God's persistence. It was time for him to stop surviving and start striving. Or start thriving, that should be, sorry. I've had the wrong thing right the way through. It should be start thriving or striving. Now, those excuses might look a lot like ours. They feel real. But when we let God in, they are just paper walls. Oh, I've done it. Been wanting to do that. Ready to be torn down. Whoop. Oh, dear. Sorry, Andrew. We let yesterday's failures shape today's decisions. We live as prisoners of the past. But it's time for us to stop surviving, start striving and thriving. And let me be frank with you. Breaking out of the doom loop isn't complicated. But you can't be half-hearted about it, because we've all got those invisible walls around us, walls built from the past, from disappointments, maybe even failure. And these walls can make us feel trapped or unable to move forward. We let our mistakes or our pain or our failures have the final word, but they're paper thin. Especially when we put our trust in God, one who's so much bigger. Now, Joan beautifully read some verses to us, and this is one of those verses she read that really feeds into this. God has made us what we are in Christ Jesus. Now, speaking to Jesus followers, you're made new. You're not what you used to be. You're someone new. God has made us new people so that we would do good works. It's not the good works that get us right with God, but they come because we're right with God. God planned in advance those good works for us. His plan for us to live our lives doing them. So what he's saying is actually when we come to Jesus, God's got a purpose for us. Now, maybe you're sitting here thinking, well, I'm not even sure what I believe about God. I am not a Jesus follower. And I get that. But just for a moment, bear with me. Imagine that God is interested in you. Yes, you. Imagine there's a purpose for you that's bigger than your fears, mistakes, even your biggest hurts. Imagine that you're not defined by what happened to you, but by what God can do through you. And whatever you've done, wherever you are, God loves you. I mean, think of Moses. He'd killed someone. Got any murderers here? Hope not. Yeah, but God does amazing things in people's lives. I remember being in Romania, and there's this guy and he had a massive scar down his face, and I said, afterwards, why's that guy got a scar? And they told me that he was the biggest thug in town, but Jesus got hold of his life, and now he was the biggest advert for Jesus in town. He told people about Jesus and cared for children. Amazing guy. Imagine the things that have weighed you down that could be the very things that lift others up. That's why you can stop surviving and start striving and thriving. And here's how to move forward. Get God's perspective. The thing is, you're seeing your life from your perspective, from your failures. And I want you to see your life as God sees you. And God doesn't see you as you might expect. You're not a failure. You're not defeated. You have an amazing future. We saw that in that verse. God has things planned for all of us. All of us. You. God had things planned for you. And then give up on your past. The trouble is we carry the past behind us. Now imagine if I suddenly sort of got very nostalgic about my old Beamer. And I rang up the scrapyard and said, I want my Beamer back. And I'd go to the scrapyard and it would be like just a kind of chunk of metal, wouldn't it? I can't get it back. It's gone. Actually, you can't get the past back. You can't change it, but you can move on to the future. Give up on your past. It's gone. You can't let it dominate today. And then grasp God's purpose. And when I say grasp God's purpose, I don't mean to say you've got to find out what that purpose is. We've got it there. Every day, God has good works for us. Every day, God has good things. And it's just a matter of day by day saying, okay, God, you've got a purpose for me today. Help me to be on the lookout for it. And he'll show you. And you'll see. And then go forward with God. One step at a time, move forward with him. God's invitation is clear. Take one step, however small, out of survival mode and towards the purpose he's calling you into. Your past might be part of the story, but it doesn't define your destiny. God has a way of turning what we see as broken into something amazing. And he uses every experience, good or bad, to shape us for the future. You just need to realize that God has a future for you. You just need to break out of that doom loop. You just need to know he's not finished with you yet. Fear can be so powerful. It can convince us that the walls around us are solid, that our past mistakes, hurts and disappointments are inescapable. But here's what I want you to take away from this whole series. Those walls are, I can't do it now, can I? Those walls are thinner than you think. And when we trust in God, we see that story, our story isn't over. God's desire is not just for you to survive, but to thrive, to move forward to a life full of purpose and growth. And trust that God can use everything you've been through, the good, the bad, the painful, to shape you as his masterhood. Stop surviving, start striving, get thriving. Just going to pray as the music group start to play. Oh Lord, we thank you that when you see everyone, you see a potential masterpiece. That you don't hold the past against us. And I pray for anyone who's struggling with the past, and the past is dictating how they see the present. Pray for those who aren't Jesus followers, who They maybe think, well, this isn't for me. May they see that you love them and you have a future for them. Pray for those of us who've been Christians for many years, yet we're still dictated to by our past mistakes. Mistakes that you've put away. May we move forward with you. Amen.